Hello, welcome to the GPP Chin Music Podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Scott Mail. We got Sports 25 to life. We're talking about GPPs tonight, of course. FanDuel, DraftKings. There's some big ones, of course. It's Friday night. A lot of big games. We've got a Coors Field game with a uncertain pitcher. Hasn't been announced yet, unless something changed the last few minutes. Heard rumors that it could be Jorge De La Rosa, which would change a lot of things with all the lefties in Atlanta's lineup. But at the same time, we still don't know yet. So we'll proceed as if we don't know, because we don't, and then we'll mention guys that would be good plays one way or another. We'll start off here at pitcher. Madison Bumgarner is your most expensive option, $11,900 on FanDuel, $11,100 on DraftKings, and he's an interesting option. Last time out against the Phillies, it wasn't at Citizens Bank Park. He gave up a grand slam to Jeff Francoeur amidst one bad inning, but still managed to go 8 innings with 11 strikeouts, put up a solid total. He's a minus 155 favorite, but they are facing Cole Hamels, so maybe the win isn't as much of a lock as we'd like for a guy at that price, especially on FanDuel. But, I mean, he's certainly got, if not the highest upside, then very, very close to it.
Yeah, I like him quite a bit. The other guy that I think is in that range is Garrett Cole, but he's facing a much tougher offense in the Cardinals. He's only minus 130. I think Cole has a bit more strikeout upside tonight because the Cardinals, for a team that hits pretty well, they do strike out quite a bit. I think Bumgarner is the clear-cut top option, though. Cole makes for probably the best GPP play because he's going to be way under-owned because of how heavily owned I expect Bumgarner to be, but I like both of them quite a bit tonight. I think I'm going to roll Cole quite a bit more in GPPs, honestly, just because of the lower ownership percentage.
Yeah, that's a really good call. Like you said, it still seems that people want to avoid pitchers against the Cardinals because, they're the Cardinals and they are record-wise the best team in baseball, but their team is definitely beatable. They're a good team offense. They're not a great individual offense. So definitely a good GPP target there. A couple of the interesting GPP guys. Clay Buchholz, it did have his worst start of the year at the Yankees, but it was in New York, of course, one of his first starts of the season, but his peripheral numbers actually match up really well with some really good pitchers this year. 23% strikeout rate, nearly a 50% ground ball rate, 0.41 home runs per 9. And this is a really dangerous Yankees offense, of course, now that you add Jacoby Ellsbury back in the mix too. But Buchholz has been one of the more consistent pitchers in the league, and you look what he's done against some really good offenses recently. Went complete game against Houston, in Boston, just 1 earned run, no home runs to that powerful offense. No home runs at Toronto in 8 innings. Faced Baltimore, no home runs in that game. In fact, he hasn't given up a home run in any of his last 8 starts. So, obviously, the Yankees can beat you with small ball, too. But I think that because he's facing the Yankees, he'll be lower owned tonight, especially on DraftKings. $6,900. I think he's a great play tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, his biggest challenge is he's facing off with Pineda, who's either been really good or really not good for most of his starts this year. And if they get good Pineda, I mean, he could have a really nice game, too. I like him as a GPP play also, 8,100. I think both of the guys in this game are solid. Even though it's an 8-run over-under, I expect one of the teams to probably have a really nice offensive game here, one of them probably to not. I like the prices on both of those guys quite a bit. Another guy I'm going to look at in that Buchholz price range is Mike Leake today against Miami. Miami's been struggling with Stanton out of the lineup. They've been a little better than expected, but Leake's also been a little bit better than you expect most of the time, too. So I think that's a nice matchup for him at 6,800. Small favorite, 7-run over-under, wind blowing in. I don't know if they're going to have the dome closed there or not tonight, but if it's not, I think it's a really strong wind blowing in, actually almost 20 miles an hour straight in from left. So I think that's a really good pitcher's environment in Miami today.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you there. He's not a guy with huge upside, but at the same time, his best start of the season came against this same team on, I believe it was June 19th. 7 innings, 2 hits, 3 walks, 7 Ks, and that was with Stanton in the lineup. Put up 30.2 DraftKings points, so I think that's a really good call there. And like you mentioned, this is just not a good offense without him. And we even saw Justin Bour absolutely destroy a ball last night to dead center, and it still didn't get out of the ballpark. So it's going to be tough for any of these guys on the Miami side to knock one out of the park. And since in the last 14 days, so essentially since Giancarlo Stanton has gone out, Marlins have the 6th highest strikeout rate in baseball, 23.1%. So I'm with you there. Mike Leake, a really good cheap option tonight as well. Actually, finally with some upside, which he doesn't usually have. Another interesting guy, Noah Syndergaard, faced off against Arizona. It's in New York. Obviously, Arizona is not the offense they are on the road as they are at home. And, Syndergaard, he's been pitching well. He's had his bad starts, had a bad one against Atlanta, had a bad one at San Diego, but he's shown some big strikeout upside at 11 against Toronto, 10 against San Diego. I think at his price point, mid 8Ks on both sites, I think he's going to be a really low-owned option tonight. And, if there's any pitcher that the Mets might be able to score some runs against, it's Chase Anderson. So maybe he gets a little bit of support. Might not need much tonight.
Yeah, definitely. Couple other guys I don't mind a ton, but not top plays for me. I think I'll be potentially rolling some Marco Estrada out for 6,200 on DraftKings. I think he's an okay play. He's been better than expected most of the season. Kansas City's offense has been kind of quiet lately. He's a small favorite. Obviously, from time to time, he gets that massive run support from Toronto, so I think he's an interesting GPP option. Another guy I think is interesting that isn't a pitcher I like to play, but Wandy Rodriguez is 5,400 on DraftKings against San Diego. Pretty strong minus 135 favorite. Pretty strong wind blowing in from right field there also. I think that's a really good setup for pitching in that game. Obviously, you want to target the side facing the San Diego lineup and not the Rangers lineup. So he's the guy I'm going to look at for a really cheap GPP option today.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad option either. So especially going to be a very low-owned guy. So one more guy you can mention. We kind of touched on him earlier, but Cole Hamels is in a very pitcher-friendly ballpark in San Francisco. We know he has upside. Giants much better against righties than lefties. So especially because he's opposing Madison Bumgarner. When you get a guy like Bumgarner, Kershaw, one of those guys, take the opposing pitcher, always a very contrarian route to take. So we know he's got
definitely skills. Yeah, right. He could definitely go 8 shutout innings, something like that, and pick up a win if they win 1-0, something like that. So that's definitely a solid GPP play we haven't gotten to yet. I agree with that one completely.
All right, and I guess we'd have to mention Lance Lynn. He had a pretty good start against the Pirates before. This is a good Pirates offense, but not a consistent Pirates offense. So definitely one that can be beaten. And we've seen Lance Lynn's got 18 strikeouts in his last 2 starts. So another guy opposing Garrett Cole, who, like you mentioned, we don't think he'll be a particularly popular play in GPPs. He might be a secondary cash game option on DK for a lot of people. But I think that alone will definitely keep Lance Lynn's ownership down as well. So a lot of those situations where you got your one ace and then another, maybe not ace, but another very good pitcher on the other side you can target in GPPs for a low percentage. Outside of that, I'm really not looking at any other cheap guys. How about you?
No, not really either. Nothing else I'm all that interested in, honestly, upside-wise.
Yeah. There's plenty of guys we already mentioned. You can build a ton of lineups if you like with those. Catcher options, Russell Martin hasn't been particularly good recently, but gets Danny Duffy. Pitcher's Park, yes, but Toronto crushes lefties. He's in play. Of course, he has Monty Grandal in play as well. 36 on FanDuel, 41 on DraftKings. He should be a pretty popular play. The guy that I love cash games and GPPs, especially on FanDuel, where it's only 2,400, is Derek Norris. Don't love all the Padres necessarily, but is a 9-run total and near minimum salary on FanDuel. Gotta think he's going to be a pretty popular play there, but probably lower owned on DraftKings at 37. So batting first or second, I think he's a nice target as well.
Yeah, I like him quite a bit too. Another guy in that same mold, another XA, John Jaso, facing a righty in McHugh, hitting first in the lineup for the Rays right now. Not a lot to argue with there. He's not super cheap, but he's not super expensive either. Also, got a obligatory mention AJ Pierzynski, assuming he's not facing a lefty. He's a little pricey at Coors, but I think he's a solid option. And then I'm guessing Nick Hundley's probably going to be in the lineup again today.
It seems like Hundley's
for Colorado,
an everyday guy now.
Right. So you got to mention him too. Outside of that, there's no one particularly cheap unless we see somebody hitting in a weird spot. You could look at Brian McCann if you want, but he's right in the same price range as all these other guys we've mentioned. And outside of him being probably a lot lower owned, I don't particularly like him more than any of the guys we've mentioned so far.
Yeah, there's one more guy I'll throw out for tournament, Stephen Vogt against Danny Salazar. Salazar, like you mentioned earlier, great strikeout pitcher and a guy that people don't like to target, but when he makes mistakes, he gives up a lot of home runs. One of the higher home runs per 9 innings of actually any pitcher on the board tonight. I believe he's second among all pitchers. Yeah, second among all pitchers tonight at home run rate. So, and by that I mean second worst. So definitely a guy that makes some mistakes, and Vogt can definitely make him pay for one of those pretty quickly.
Yep.
First base options, there are a lot, as there always are. Love Prince Fielder tonight against fly ball pitcher and Ian Kennedy. Ian Kennedy giving up more than 2 home runs per 9 innings, but Fielder doesn't even need to hit home runs to pay off his tag tonight. He's been an incredible hitter all season long, hitting a lot of line drives. We talk about every week. He's at 345 on the season, so great play there. Nice contrarian play is going to be Paul Goldschmidt at $5,200 against Noah Syndergaard. Like we mentioned, Noah Syndergaard's a guy who has great stuff, but he's struggled at times. So if Arizona does hit him, you got to imagine that Paul Goldschmidt will be a part of that. And I mean, the guy can hit everyone. He's arguably the best hitter in the National League right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can't argue with playing him in a GPP ever. There's just massive upside there. A couple other guys in pretty good spots. Adrian Gonzalez against a fly ball heavy righty and Jimmy Nelson. Joey Votto against another fly ball heavy righty and Phelps. Edwin Encarnacion against the lefty is always a solid GPP play. Only 4,500 against the lefty today is a pretty nice price tag there. You mentioned Vogt at catcher. I think he's a fine option at first base at 3,400 on DraftKings. You talked about Prince Fielder. I'll mention Mitch Moreland just because he's only 4,300, but he's a first baseman on DraftKings, also in that same matchup with Kennedy. Prefer him on FanDuel in the outfield, where you can play both him and Fielder since they're hitting next to each other against righties so often, but I don't mind him as a low-owned option at first base today either.
Yeah, I like that call quite a bit there. And you mentioned that, but it's priced especially on FanDuel, $2,600. Or I'm sorry, $2,900.
Yeah.
Very, very cheap over there. So, also, you consider Adam Lind. You didn't say Adam Lind, did you?
No, I didn't. He was in that. He's in that price range group though, for sure. I like him too against a righty. Assuming Ben Paulson's back in the lineup against a righty today, I think he's a fine play. He's pretty cheap everywhere. Justin Bour had a nice, solid game last night. He's 3,200 on DraftKings, 2,900 on FanDuel, I believe. He's facing Leak, who is a guy I'm going to be using quite a bit, but I'll consider him pretty heavily in games that I'm not throwing Leak in.
Yeah, and Leak also really struggles with lefties. Really good against righties, but 344 will, but at lefties. So definitely a guy that can be beat there. Outside of that, if you want a really cheap guy to chase the home run, he's been terrible recently, but min salary on FanDuel, Lucas Duda. Not a guy you feel good about, but we know he has power. Just really struggling to play right now. But I think he's a guy you could just kind of slot in there and just hope he gets a hold of one against Chase Anderson tonight. Second base options, going to be interesting. I really like Brian Dozier against Justin Verlander tonight. I know we like to target him against lefties, but he's pretty good against righties as well. And Verlander's just been awful since he came back up. Kind of picking up where he left off last year, where he just wasn't very good, especially against right-handed batters. Had some serious reverse splits there. So I like him quite a bit. Of course, D. Gordon going to be popular again. Stole 3 bases last night, tried to steal a 4th. He's got big-time upside. I mean, just by steals alone, mentioned Leak struggles against lefties, so all he needs to do is get on, and he's going to at least try to steal bases.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point.
Jason Kipnis against Kendall Graveman. Graveman's been an adequate pitcher, not particularly good against left-handed batters, though, so I think he's a good tournament option as well. And then going to be interesting to see where Rougned Odor is batting. He's got a really nice price tag on FanDuel, not bad on DraftKings, but we've seen him bat 8th recently. If he's up near the top of the order again by Shin-Soo Choo and Fielder and all them, I like him as well.
Yeah, as far as other second basemen go, I mean, there's not a ton I like. Dietrich is a guy that I'll look at 3,200 on DraftKings. He's pretty cheap on FanDuel also. You mentioned Leak struggles with lefties. Obviously, you can't go both him and D. Gordon on DraftKings, which makes it tough. But that's an interesting stack on FanDuel, where I think Dietrich is still third base eligible. Not a ton else I really like at second base. I don't mind Steve Pearce as a value, high upside option as a second baseman on DraftKings for 3,300 against a lefty and Gonzalez. I like Gonzalez a decent amount tonight just because Baltimore, I mean, has so many power lefties in their lineup that he'll be able to neutralize a little bit. But I like some of these righties against him, so he's a tough guy to play. But Pierce's second base eligibility gives him some nice upside at a position there isn't a ton of it.
Yeah, I like that call a lot as well. And I'll throw out Jimmy Paredes. Hasn't been hitting particularly well, but if he's in the lineup, especially on DraftKings at 3,500, Gio Gonzalez has not been good against right-handed batters this season. So definitely a guy that can be beat, especially in Camden Yards. Third base options, Josh Donaldson, of course, against the lefty. Maybe you're sick of hearing it. Hopefully you know it by now. Danny Duffy's also really struggled with righties this year, so he's your top option at third base. Nolan Arenado, of course, an option at Coors Field, but in a righty-righty matchup against Shelby Miller, who's been tough against righties, kind of scaring me off him a little bit. Really interesting option for me. I like Manny Machado in tournaments. He's 4,200 on DraftKings. Pretty expensive as well on FanDuel at 4,300. That's going to drive his ownership really, really low, I think, tonight. And once again, I think I know I'm a fan of right-handed batters against Gio tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I feel the same way. Machado's a really solid play at his price, basically everywhere. Josh Donaldson, obviously the top play against the lefty, and Duffy. Basically, all these Toronto righties are going to be really strong plays today. It's going to be a really popular stack. There was one other guy that I really liked today. Oh, Matt Carpenter against Cole is a pretty interesting GPP option, I think, because, I mean, the Cardinals don't have, like, a ton of really, like, stack-worthy players. So I think Carpenter is going to be super low-owned on an individual basis, especially going up against an ace like Cole. I think for 3,800, he makes a pretty high upside guy that's going to be super low-owned.
Yeah, and he's under $3,000 on FanDuel, so even cheaper there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that call quite a bit. Other third base options, if you're looking for cheap, there's not a whole lot. You could play Kelly Johnson at third base, depending on who's in the lineup for Colorado. It's another one of those situations where we really don't know as far as who the pitcher is going to be on the other side. So outfield eligible on FanDuel, but if it's a lefty, if it's De La Rosa on the mound, I'm not playing Kelly Johnson lefty-lefty matchup, so just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, same.
All right, moving on here to shortstop. Of course, there's your top option, Troy Tulowitzki. Once again, tough pitcher, but still in Coors Field, so he's certainly in play. He's going to be a pretty popular play. Jose Reyes, probably going to be the second most popular play, I would imagine, tonight against Danny Duffy. Top of that Toronto lineup. You already mentioned how popular they'll be, and I'm sure you guys all probably knew that anyway. Carlos Correa is going to be a nice swerve here against Erasmo Ramirez, giving up a ton of hard contact this year. I think he's a nice tournament swerve off of the two popular guys tonight.
Yeah. Francisco Lindor, I believe, had a home run last night.
Yep.
I think he's a pretty solid option. He's really cheap everywhere. I think he's 2,500 on FanDuel and 3,100 on DraftKings against Graveman. I think he's a pretty solid value option. Not a ton of upside. Like, you're not expecting to repeat the home run. He's not a big power guy or anything, but he's been getting on base a decent amount, and that price just is a nice play at shortstop if you don't want to pay up for somebody like Reyes or Tulowitzki or Correa or something like that, because there's not a ton of other cheap options. I mean, Cesar Hernandez, after facing Kershaw and Greinke the last 2 days, gets Bumgarner tonight. Like, I mean, I saw people like getting upset about playing him the last 2 days. Like, don't play him against aces if you're going to get upset about a value guy getting out.
Yeah.
I mean, there's better options today than going after him again. Obviously, he's a switch hitter, so he never runs into those matchups where you're like absolutely hating him. But I just don't want to play him against somebody like that. As far as other value guys go at shortstop, there's not really a ton I like. Andrew Romine's a guy I've been playing a little bit. He's only 2,300. He's been hitting 7th in the order against righties, which he faces Irvin Santana tonight. I think he's okay. Just the fact that he's in that Detroit lineup that still has some pop without Cabrera makes him a fine play. Not too much else. I think I'm sticking to him and Lindor as my two cheaper guys today.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I'll throw out one more guy, Ian Desmond. He has a bunch of power. Not a guy that I like, and has not been consistent by any means, but he does have some pop. And facing off against Chris Tillman, who's just given up over a 400 WOBA to right-handed batters. So definitely, if I'm going to be targeting him, I'm going to do it in the cheap way, and I think Desmond's not a bad GPP swerve there. Outfield options, speaking of Chris Tillman, love Bryce Harper in tournaments tonight against him in Camden Yards, $5,700 on DraftKings. He's expensive, but I think he's going to be fairly low-owned because of, obviously, Coors Field game, people wanting to get Bumgarner, these other big pitchers. Some other interesting options. Gotta love Nelson Cruz. He's really cheap on FanDuel, 3,300, 48 on DraftKings. Gets a fly ball lefty, 52.5% fly ball rate for Hector Santiago. And then my sneaky play, I don't know how sneaky he'll be, but he usually is. Lorenzo Cain has been crushing the ball recently, stealing bases, hitting home runs. He's doing it all. And he's got a fair price tag, 47 on DraftKings, 37 on FanDuel, going against Marco Estrada tonight. I think that he's definitely my favorite Royals bat, and I think he's going to be really low-owned.
Yeah, I think so too. Definitely a really strong play. Jock Peterson, another guy that I'm probably going to keep running out there, facing a righty and Jimmy Nelson that we know gives up a ton of home runs, strikes out a decent amount of guys, which are about the only two things Peterson does at this point. he's been cold a little bit. Like he's been on base basically one time at each of the last 4 games when everyone played him pretty heavily against Philadelphia during that series. So I think his ownership percentage is going to be a little bit lower tonight, despite another pretty good matchup for him. Again, in that same vein, I like Evier. He's been really solid for a really cheap price tag on both sites. He's a really strong play. Michael Brantley is another guy I like quite a bit tonight. He's a little bit more expensive than both of these guys, up at 4,700, but he's been on fire. He just doesn't have the power right now, which I feel like at some point it's going to come around a little bit at the very least. I like Mike Trout a ton against Montgomery. I think he's probably my top play, but he's going to be kind of tough to afford because I'm going to try and throw some good pitchers tonight. As far as cheaper guys go, let's see. There's not really anything I'm like enamored with, really. Is there anybody you're looking like really strongly at? Like Kelly Johnson is my top like points per dollar guy, and he's 3,600 on DraftKings, and he's I want to say 2,600 on FanDuel, and he's a third baseman. So there's not a lot that I'm really liking it in the outfield. Chris Cobayello, we mentioned all the Blue Jays already. He's 3,300 on DraftKings, 2,900 on FanDuel. He's a strong play, but there's no one super cheap that I like today.
No, I mean, nobody I'm in love with. Shin-Soo Choo, he's $2,600 on FanDuel. Great price there. He should be batting second. I'm picking on Ian Kennedy tonight, in case you hadn't noticed.
Yeah, Josh Hamilton is another GPP play I really like tonight. He looked pretty good yesterday to walk in a double.
Yeah.
He's relatively cheap for the most part. He's a little bit pricier on DraftKings, but, I mean, he's got some really strong power upside. You mentioned Kennedy gives up a ton of fly balls. I like that whole Texas lineup as a secondary stack, too.
Yeah, and Gerardo Parra, I'll throw out there, 3,200 on FanDuel, 37 on DraftKings, a nice price for him against Bolsinger. Bolsinger hasn't given up a lot of hard contact or home runs this year, but Parra's just been a very consistent hitter at the top of that lineup when facing a righty, so he's another guy that I'll consider. I mean, certainly nothing close to a must-play, but I think he's going to be a guy that's got some upside that will be lower-owned in tournaments tonight for sure. Couple other cheap guys I'll mention before we get out of here. I like David Murphy against Kendall Graveman. He's pretty cheap as well.
Yep.
Outside of that, if you need really cheap, it's going to be really tough. Guys like there was one more guy I had it down here really cheap. Gregory Polanco, especially on FanDuel.
Yeah, I looked at him a little bit too. He's been on FanDuel, isn't he?
Almost 2,300, so it's very close to min. I think he's an okay play. Oh, I got one more for you on FanDuel. Mark Trumbo, $2,300, crushes left-handed pitching. I think he's a great play there. Not quite as good of a play on DraftKings where he's 38, but definitely a guy you'll still consider because he's actually hit pretty well. 7 hits in his last 3 games, and as we know, one of the better power hitters as far as non-everyday starters, I guess it is, against lefties in the league.
Yep, I'll throw a couple more guys out while we're talking about outfielders. Still, Preston Tucker at 3,400 is a solid play against Ramirez, a righty. One guy I really like tonight, if I'm not throwing Rodriguez for Texas, is if Justin Upton's in the lineup. He's questionable with an oblique injury, but if he's in the lineup on FanDuel, I think he's a really strong play for that price in GPPs. He's been really good against lefties in his career. Hasn't been as good this year, but I like him quite a bit. No one's going to have him because he's questionable today. If he's in the lineup, I think he's a guy that has some nice upside at probably under 2% ownership.
Yeah, I really like that call a lot. I mean, like you said, his price really, really cheap. And especially because he just hasn't had great numbers against lefties this year, but throughout his career just crushes them. So definitely like that. All right, that's going to wrap things up for us. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out our Optimizer Colossus and all of our other great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.